So before we begin looking at the syllabus and everything, first I want to talk just a little bit about Sanskrit itself. All of us being here in the Sanskrit class, of course, we all have some interest in the language. And for, I would say, probably all of us, of course, that is a spiritual interest that we have very specifically. You know, for myself, I studied Sanskrit in many, many different ways. I studied it in the traditional way, in accordance with the Ashtadhyayi, which is the Paninian grammar, which is the traditional grammar that has been used for thousands and thousands of years. I also studied it academically for 4 years as a graduate student at the University of Wisconsin. I studied it in various other ways as well. And I have been studying Sanskrit for, I don't want to say how long, very long time. However, having said that, the way that Sanskrit is taught in academia, unfortunately, is the wrong way. It is taught as a dead language. And Sanskrit, as we will see, is quite literally the opposite of a dead language. The reason why so many people indeed have an interest in Sanskrit is, again, because of the spiritual component of Sanskrit. Because it's understood that the Sanskrit language is not a language like other languages. There are thousands, literally thousands of languages in the world today. And the truth of the matter is most of these languages have evolved from one language to another, have been influenced by other languages. Conquering nations will come in and impose their language upon another people, which will serve as a layer upon the original language, etc., etc., etc. Most languages today, modern languages, of course, are indeed very much mongrelized languages. English is a perfect example of this. English is one of the most mongrelized languages in the world, which is why for many people who come from cultures that have more systematic languages, it's sometimes difficult for them to learn English because the rules and regulations of English are not very standard. What we'll see with Sanskrit is the opposite is the case. Sanskrit is definitely the most standardized language in the world, but more than this, what makes Sanskrit different from every other language in the world, among other things, is this: it is the origin of all languages. It is that language from which all other languages proceed. Now, having said this, I see a few people nodding their head, and most people are not going to disagree with this. Having said this, I need to go a little bit deeper, because many people have heard this concept before, that linguistically, as far as the so-called tree of languages and how languages have developed, many of us, of course, know that Greek and Latin, for example, are derived from Sanskrit, that Lithuanian and Finnish are derived from Sanskrit. In fact, many of the verb conjugations that you find in the Finnish language come directly from Sanskrit. Very, very similar languages. We know that many of the languages historically came from Sanskrit. But what I'm talking about when I say that Sanskrit is the origin of all languages is not merely historically, but something more important. Metaphysically, it is the case that all material sound vibration has its origin in transcendent sound vibration. And it is in this way specifically that I mean that Sanskrit is the origin of all languages. Let me back up a little bit. The way that truth is conveyed is via sound vibration. And we've talked about this in the past. People who have been to our satsangs in the past, we've talked about this very, very in depth. I wrote a whole book about this. The way that language is conveyed is that originally it exists as what is called aparusheya shabda. It exists as eternal sound vibration that exists co-eternal, co-absolute with Brahman, with God. In the depths of Samadhi meditation, the rishis access that sound vibration. It then becomes concretized in the form of speech, of then material sound vibration. From there, ultimately, it gets written down in Devanagari. And that is what we call our Shastra, our scriptures. But again, going back, it begins as eternal sound vibration. All right? Now, understanding this metaphysical premise of sound vibration, what is Sanskrit? What is Sanskrit? The sound vibration itself is Shakti. The language, on the other hand, is Shaktiman. Okay? So in other words, you have sound vibration, you have truth in the form of sound vibration. When that truth needs a vehicle through which it can then be communicated, that is language, and specifically Sanskrit. Okay? Sanskrit exists for one thing, and only one thing, and that is to convey sound vibration in such a way that we as human beings with bodies and with senses can then understand it. How is that for a language? That is Sanskritam. Thus, the word Sanskritam itself means what? Perfected. Perfected. That is literally what the word is translated into in English. It is the perfected language, and more, it is Devanagari. Devanagari. It is the language of the gods. That's why the name of this course is Spiritual Sanskrit, the language of the gods. I want to talk about that a little bit, because people have heard that also. Oh, Devanagari. Okay, well, that's the language of the gods. You know, that's nice. What does that mean? When Indra orders pizza, he uses Sanskrit, you know? Well, first, he doesn't order pizza, but if he orders a samosa, he will. Indeed, use Sanskrit. The gods speak Sanskrit. So if we were to go to use the general term svarga, to the heavenly realms, and if we were indeed to encounter the devas and devis, they would expect us to speak to them in pure Sanskrit. That's the first thing. If we don't speak to them in Sanskrit, they're not going to address us. They're not even going to look at us. It's not out of arrogance. It's out of pity. It's out of pity that we don't know how to communicate like civilized beings. Okay? That's the first thing. Second thing is the devas themselves, when they encounter each other, because again, and you've heard me talk about this in the past, and not enough, I need to talk about this much more in the future. In Vedic civilization, etiquette is everything. How you address someone is very important. When the devas themselves even encounter one another, the first thing that they do is what? Hey, how you doing? Hey, Surya, hey, I haven't seen you for a long time. No, no. What do? First thing that they do is invocation. They address each other in a proper manner in accordance with their stature and in accordance with their ontological status. Okay, hierarchy. Hierarchy. For those who have been infected by modern materialism, modernity, and who think that hierarchy is a dirty word, this is not going to be a class for you. And more, Sanatana Dharma is not the path for you. Hierarchy is nature. Hierarchy is nature, as nature is expressed. Okay? But more, how we reflect this as living beings, and let's say as manushya, as non-animal beings, that is, as human beings up to the level of the devas. The way that we express hierarchy and the way that we express nature is to treat every individual as an individual. And what that means is when you find someone higher than you, you respect them. When you find someone on your same level, you become their friend. When you find someone who is indeed lower than you, what do? You help them. You have compassion toward them. Okay? The devas, understanding this, when they meet each other for the first time, in accordance with where they stand in hierarchy in relationship to each other, they address each other first with Sanskritic invocations, and then they speak to each other in pure Sanskrit. All right? So Sanskrit is indeed the language of the gods. More than this, at one time it was the language of the entire earth. It was the language of the entire earth. And this was up until several thousand years ago. In fact, people may not be aware of this, some people are, that in Vedic, and I can't use the word India, it has to be South Asia, because we're talking about roughly 3,000 years ago. India didn't exist, but there was Vedic South Asia, which includes everything from parts of Persia, basically all the way to the Philippines. Okay? In this area, the language that was spoken by the common individual, everyone from the clothing washer to the Brahmanas, was Sanskrit. In time, as Kali Yuga progresses, what comes into being are the Prakritas, the Prakrit languages. That is one step down from Sanskrit. From there come two branches. The Mleccha languages, what are called the Mleccha languages, those are the European languages, the Indo-European languages, and then the modern Indian languages that we have today. Okay? Hindi, Bengali, Marathi, Nepali, etc. All these languages. All right? So Very important. So this is the nature of Sanskrit. The reason why it is important for us to study Sanskrit, spiritually speaking, are several things. First, certainly, it's very helpful in reading the scriptures, because if you are a follower of Sanatana Dharma, the Shastra is everything. The Shastra is where we get our information, where we get our guidance. It's where we get our inspiration. It's from Bhagavad Gita, from the Vedas, from the Upanishads, from the Puranas, all these wonderful works. Okay? Second reason is this. And in fact, before I even give the reason in an overt way, first let me give an example, because it's a very similar sort of example. Yoga, asana. Okay? Why do we learn asana? Why do we try to become very, very good at asana?
Prepare our bodies.
And to prepare our bodies for what?
For further yoga, for the deeper.
For a dhyana, for meditation. Yes, exactly. In the same way, exactly the same way, why do we learn Sanskrit? So that we can perfect our saying the mantras, our recitation of the mantras. Now, why is this important? Well, mantra is something we're not even going to go into, because that's a science that we literally could talk about for weeks just by itself. There's an entire school called Vyakarana that deals with the science of sound and of mantra. Literally, there's an entire school, and there have been great philosophers who have written volumes about this. But one thing that I have to say in relation to Sanskrit and mantra is that it is absolutely the case that for a mantra to be completely effective in the recitation of mantra, we have to have the correct pronunciation. Very, very important. Very important. There are some people who are very, 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 very modern thinkers, who are very sentimental, who like to say that, oh, it doesn't matter, just as long as you're sincere. Well, yes and no. Sincerity is important. Sincerity coupled with ability cannot be beaten. Sincerity is not enough. You must have sincerity and you must have ability together, wedded. When you have this, then spiritually speaking, there is no height to which you cannot attain. So we must have both. We must have both. Okay?
So make etiquette?
Etiquette? No. We're talking about as far as specifically mantra meditation. Yeah. So what I'm saying is, some people say that if you're saying mantra, oh, it doesn't matter if you don't pronounce things correctly, just as long as you're sincere. That is what I'm saying is that is not 100% true. Sincerity is important, but sincerity by itself is much weaker than sincerity coupled with ability. In other words, coupled with saying the mantra correctly. And again, if we understand that the words that we are using, that we call mantras, are in fact keys, and I've used this example in the past. If you want to get into your home and you're using your car key, are you going to get into your home? No. You'll break through the window, you'll break the door down, you'll do something to get in, but that key's not going to work. Mantras are keys. And what makes a mantra a specific key? That exact frequency, that exact sound vibration. So this is why pronunciation is of extreme importance.